Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. In 1945, 2 atomic bombs ended a war and began a new world order. How did America rise from a battered economy to the most powerful nation on Earth? As images of bombed cities and exhausted soldiers flash across the screen, the devastation of World War II sets the stage. Then, scenes shift to bustling factories, crowded suburban neighborhoods, and the proud raising of the American flag on foreign soil. A nation once crippled by the Great Depression now stands tall. This transformation didn't happen by accident. It was driven by economic revival, fueled by wartime production, military dominance solidified by unmatched nuclear power, and a shrewd political strategy that positioned the U.S. at the center of global decision-making. In this video, we'll dive deep into how America turned catastrophe into global supremacy, and why that legacy still shapes our world today. As World War II drew to a close in 1945, the world stood at a crossroads. The Axis powers lay defeated, but the cost had been catastrophic. Cities across Europe and Asia were reduced to rubble, economies were shattered, and millions of lives had been lost. In stark contrast, the United States emerged not only victorious, but also relatively unscathed at home. Unlike the cities of London, Berlin, Tokyo, or Warsaw, American infrastructure remained intact. Factories that had once produced cars and consumer goods had been repurposed during the war to build tanks, planes, and weapons at an unprecedented scale. This industrial boom did more than fuel the war effort. It pulled the U.S. out of the Great Depression and positioned it as the only major economy left standing strong. While other nations struggled to rebuild from ashes, America's production capacity had multiplied, its workforce had expanded, and its technological innovations had leapt forward. By 1945, the United States held over half of the world's manufacturing output and possessed 2/3 of its gold reserves. Militarily, America now boasted the most powerful armed forces on Earth, crowned by the newly demonstrated might of nuclear weapons. This rare combination of economic strength and military supremacy set the stage for a new era in global leadership, with America ready to step into a role that would define the second half of the 20th century. In the aftermath of World War II, America's economic dominance was undeniable. By the late 1940s, the United States was producing nearly half of all goods manufactured worldwide. While Europe and Asia focused on the massive task of reconstruction, American factories churned out everything from automobiles and appliances to steel and textiles, flooding both domestic and international markets. This unmatched industrial capacity allowed the U.S. to wield enormous influence over the shape of the global economy. In 1944, even before the war officially ended, world leaders gathered at the Bretton Woods Conference in New Hampshire to design a new international financial system. It was here that the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and the World Bank were created, both institutions heavily influenced and largely funded by the United States. The agreements reached at Bretton Woods placed the U.S. dollar at the center of global finance, pegging it to gold and requiring other currencies to tie their value to the dollar. This not only secured the dollar's status as the world's dominant currency, but also cemented America's role as the anchor of international economic stability. Back home, the U.S. government understood that simply winning the war was not enough. It had to win the peace as well. Memories of the Great Depression were still fresh, and there was a very real fear that the sudden return of millions of soldiers could flood the job market, drive wages down, and trigger another economic collapse. To prevent this, policymakers crafted one of the most ambitious social programs in American history, the Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944, better known as the GI Bill. This legislation was revolutionary because it invested directly in people, not just industries. It offered veterans generous benefits, including tuition payments for college and vocational training, low-cost mortgages for buying homes, low-interest loans to start businesses, and unemployment insurance to provide a financial cushion as they transitioned back into civilian life. The GI Bill opened the doors of higher education to millions who would otherwise never have been able to afford it. Before the war, college had been a privilege largely reserved for the wealthy elite. After the GI Bill, universities across the nation swelled with new students, many of them from working-class backgrounds, leading to an explosion in the number of engineers, scientists, doctors, teachers, and other skilled professionals. This vast improvement in human capital fed directly into America's post-war economic boom, creating a workforce capable of supporting rapid industrial expansion and technological innovation. At the same time, the GI Bill made homeownership achievable for a broad segment of the population. With access to affordable mortgages, veterans flocked to buy newly built houses in suburban developments, sparking a massive construction boom. Entire towns and communities sprang up almost overnight, complete with new schools, shopping centers, and infrastructure. This suburbanization not only transformed the physical landscape of America, but also created a powerful consumer class eager to buy automobiles, appliances, furniture, and all the other goods pouring out of American factories. In essence, the Post-WWII GI Bill laid the groundwork for a new kind of American dream, one centered on education, homeownership, stable employment, and upward mobility. It lifted millions into the middle class and helped close economic gaps that had persisted for generations. It also fostered a sense of stability and optimism that would fuel economic growth for decades. By strategically investing in its returning soldiers, America didn't just avoid economic disaster. It ignited a cycle of prosperity that would define the nation's global dominance in the second half of the 20th century. In the immediate aftermath of World War II, the United States held a military advantage that no other nation could match. For a brief but crucial period, it was the only country in the world with nuclear weapons. The bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki had not only forced Japan's surrender, but also sent a stark message to the rest of the world about the devastating power America now commanded. This nuclear monopoly gave the U.S. an unparalleled strategic edge, allowing it to influence global affairs with the threat of force in the background. Although the Soviet Union would eventually break this monopoly in 1949 with its own atomic bomb, during the critical first years after the war, America stood as the sole nuclear superpower. At the same time, the United States did not rely solely on its atomic arsenal. It massively expanded its conventional military forces, building the most powerful Navy and Air Force the world had ever seen. American aircraft carriers roamed the seas, giving the U.S. the ability to project power anywhere on the globe. Strategic air command units were positioned to deliver nuclear and conventional strikes if needed, ensuring that America could respond rapidly to any threat, anywhere. In addition to its vast home-based military infrastructure, the U.S. began establishing permanent bases across Europe, Asia, and later the Middle East. These bases were not just defensive positions, they were statements of intent that America would play an active role in maintaining global order. Institutionally, the U.S. government also reorganized its defense and intelligence operations to meet the demands of its new superpower status. In 1947, the Department of Defense was created to unify the military services, and the Pentagon became its symbol. A massive centralized command center reflecting America's new military-industrial might. That same year, the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, was formed, tasked with gathering intelligence and conducting covert operations around the world to counter perceived threats, particularly from the growing influence of the Soviet Union. Alongside these developments, the National Security Council, NSC, was established to coordinate foreign and defense policy at the highest levels of government. NSC 68 was not just another policy paper, it was a radical and defining moment that permanently reshaped America's approach to both national security and its role in the world. Drafted largely by Paul Nitze and approved under President Harry Truman, NSC 68 argued that the Soviet Union posed a fundamental threat not only to American interests, but to the very survival of free societies everywhere. The document described the world as divided between two opposing ways of life, the democratic ideals of the United States and the totalitarianism of the Soviet Union. According to NSC 68, coexistence was impossible. The only way to ensure the survival of freedom was through strength, overwhelming, undeniable strength. What made NSC 68 so transformative was its insistence that the U.S. must build and maintain military superiority on a global scale even in peacetime. This was a major departure from traditional American policy. Historically, the U.S. had drastically downsized its military after major conflicts, returning to a focus on domestic affairs. NSC 68 shattered that tradition, calling for a massive peacetime buildup of armed forces, a rapid expansion of nuclear capabilities, and a dramatic increase in defense spending, by some estimates up to 3 or 4 times the existing budget. It emphasized the need for readiness not just for immediate conflicts, but for a prolonged global struggle against communism that could last decades. This call for a permanent, heavily militarized posture led directly to the establishment of what President Dwight Eisenhower would later call the military-industrial complex, a close and lasting relationship between the government, the armed forces, and private industries that supplied military equipment and technology. Defense contractors grew into some of the largest and most powerful corporations in the country, influencing policy and shaping economic priorities. Military bases, weapons research facilities, and intelligence agencies like the CIA became permanent fixtures in American life. NSC 68 also framed the Cold War as a moral crusade, encouraging the idea that the United States had a duty to defend liberty worldwide. This mindset justified U.S. involvement in conflicts far from its own borders, from Korea to Vietnam and beyond. In doing so, it entrenched the idea that American leadership and military engagement were essential not only for national survival, but for the protection of global stability and freedom. By committing itself to a permanent state of military readiness and ideological struggle, the U.S. positioned itself as the leader of the free world. NSC 68 didn't just respond to immediate threats. It constructed the framework for America's long-term global strategy, shaping foreign and domestic policies for the remainder of the 20th century and beyond. It locked the United States into a path where military power, economic strength, and ideological commitment to democracy were inseparably linked, forming the foundation of America's post-war rise to superpower status. As World War II ended, a new kind of conflict quickly emerged. Not a battle fought with tanks and guns, but one fought with ideologies, alliances, and influence. The world was now divided between two superpowers: the United States, championing democracy and capitalism, and the Soviet Union, promoting communism and authoritarian control. This rivalry, known as the Cold War, wasn't just about territory or economics. It was a fundamental clash over how societies should be organized and who would lead the future of the world. Each side viewed the other's system as an existential threat, setting the stage for decades of tension, competition, and proxy wars. To counter the spread of Soviet influence without triggering another world war, the United States turned to economic aid as a strategic weapon. In 1947, Secretary of State George Marshall proposed a massive financial assistance program to help rebuild Europe's shattered economies. The Marshall Plan wasn't just humanitarian, it was a powerful tool of soft power. By pouring billions of IORs, dollars into Europe, rebuilding industries, stabilizing currencies, and restoring trade, the U.S. hoped to create strong, prosperous democracies that would resist communist movements. The success of the Marshall Plan was staggering. It not only accelerated Europe's recovery, but also tied Western Europe's future closely to the United States, deepening political and economic bonds that would last for generations. Yet economic aid alone wasn't enough. Recognizing the need for a collective security framework, the United States led the formation of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, in 1949. This was a historic shift. For the first time in its history, the U.S. entered a permanent, peacetime military alliance, pledging that an attack on one member would be considered an attack on all. NATO served as a military deterrent against Soviet aggression and symbolized America's deep and lasting commitment to defending democracy beyond its own borders. Complementing these efforts was the Truman Doctrine, announced by President Harry Truman in 1947. It was a bold statement of American foreign policy that declared the U.S. would support free peoples resisting subjugation by armed minorities or outside pressures, a direct reference to communist insurgencies and Soviet expansionism. Initially applied to crises in Greece and Turkey, the Truman Doctrine quickly expanded into a global commitment, signaling that America would intervene anywhere in the world to defend democracy against communism. Through the Marshall Plan, NATO, and the Truman Doctrine, the United States fundamentally altered the course of global history in the post-war era. These initiatives were not simply reactions to Soviet expansion. They were proactive efforts to create a world system aligned with American values and interests. The Marshall Plan, by revitalizing Europe's shattered economies, proved that prosperity was a powerful antidote to the appeal of communism. Instead of allowing desperation and instability to open the door to authoritarian ideologies, the U.S. helped lay the foundations for stable democratic governments and a thriving transatlantic economy. This infusion of aid wasn't charity. It strategically positioned the United States as the indispensable partner in Europe's recovery, weaving American influence into the fabric of Western societies. NATO reinforced this network of alliances by transforming ideological partnership into military reality. For the first time, the United States abandoned its historical reluctance to entangle itself in old world politics during peacetime. By joining NATO, America sent a clear and lasting message: it would not stand by if democracy was threatened by external aggression. This alliance acted as both a shield and a statement, solidifying America's role as the protector of the free world and setting a precedent for future security commitments around the globe. The Truman Doctrine gave this new global strategy its moral and philosophical foundation. It framed the Cold War not just as a geopolitical contest, but as a righteous struggle between freedom and tyranny. The U.S. pledged support to any nation, anywhere, that was willing to resist oppression. This sweeping commitment expanded America's sphere of influence far beyond Europe and embedded the principle of interventionism deep into U.S. foreign policy. Together, these strategies didn't just counter Soviet ambitions, they established the United States as the architect of a new international order built on open markets, political freedom, and collective security. They projected an image of America as a champion of democracy and human rights, even as practical interests. Maintaining access to markets, resources, and strategic territories often drove U.S. actions behind the scenes. By intertwining its ideals with its strategic needs, the United States locked itself into a leadership role that would define its foreign and domestic policies for generations to come, setting the stage for its dominance throughout the second half of the 20th century. In addition to its military, economic, and political dominance, the United States wielded another powerful tool in shaping the post-war world: its culture. In the years following World War II, American movies, music, fashion, and consumer goods swept across the globe, creating a cultural influence that was as potent as any army. Hollywood became the world's entertainment capital, exporting ideals of freedom, individualism, and success through glamorous films that captivated audiences from Paris to Tokyo. American music, from jazz and blues to the emerging sounds of rock and roll, energized a generation eager for new expressions of freedom and identity. American products, from Coca-Cola to Levi's jeans, became symbols of modern life and aspiration, embedding the image of the American lifestyle deep into the consciousness of people worldwide. This cultural explosion was accompanied by breathtaking scientific and technological advances. The end of World War II ushered in the atomic age, where nuclear energy, once only seen as a weapon, was also promoted as a new, almost magical source of power for industry and medicine. At the same time, the U.S. invested heavily in technological research and innovation, giving birth to early computers like ENIAC, which laid the foundation for the digital revolution. The seeds of the space race were also planted in these years, as American scientists, many working with captured German technology and expertise, began exploring the possibilities of rocketry and space exploration. These technological achievements reinforced the idea that the United States was not just powerful, but the vanguard of human progress itself. Threaded through all these developments was the powerful narrative of the American dream. It promised that through hard work and determination, anyone could achieve success, wealth, and personal freedom. This vision was not just an internal rallying cry. It was marketed to the world as a shining alternative to the gray austerity and oppression associated with communist regimes. The suburban home, the family car, the steady job. These became universal symbols of a life worth striving for, and they carried an emotional pull that was often more persuasive than any political doctrine. By combining cultural allure, scientific innovation, and the compelling ideal of limitless opportunity, the United States extended its influence into nearly every aspect of global life. American culture and technology didn't just entertain or impress, they inspired, offering a vision of the future that millions around the world wanted to be part of. In doing so, the U.S. strengthened its global leadership not just through force, or diplomacy, but through the power of imagination and aspiration. Despite the United States' remarkable rise to global prominence in the immediate post-war period, it faced a series of significant challenges that tested both its resolve and its ability to maintain its leadership role on the world stage. 1. Of the most immediate challenges came from the Soviet Union, which rapidly rebuilt its military and technological capabilities after the war. In 1949, just 4 years after the United States had monopolized nuclear weapons, the Soviet Union successfully tested its own atomic bomb, ending America's nuclear monopoly and heightening fears of a nuclear arms race. This development sparked a wave of anxiety and competition, as both superpowers began stockpiling more powerful nuclear arsenals, each determined not to fall behind the other. This competition wasn't confined to weaponry alone. It extended into the realm of science and technology. The Soviet Union's successful launch of Sputnik 1 in 1957, the first artificial satellite, marked the beginning of the space race. The U.S., shaken by this technological leap, scrambled to catch up, leading to the establishment of NASA and a major push to place an American astronaut on the moon. At the same time, the United States faced a deeply unsettling challenge on its own soil, the fear of communism spreading within its borders. The post-war period saw an intense wave of anti-communist sentiment, fueled in part by the rise of the Soviet Union and fears of espionage and ideological subversion. This led to the Red Scare, a period marked by widespread suspicion and paranoia. At the forefront of this movement was Senator Joseph McCarthy, who became the symbol of the hunt for alleged communists within the U.S. government, the entertainment industry, and other sectors of American society. McCarthyism, as it came to be known, was a political witch hunt that ruined the careers of countless innocent individuals, and it left an enduring mark on American politics. The fear of communism extended beyond just politics. It permeated daily life, as citizens lived in fear of being labeled disloyal, facing loss of employment, social ostracism, or worse. Overseas, the United States' commitment to defending democracy was put to the test in the Korean War. In 1950, North Korea, supported by the Soviet Union and China, invaded the South, threatening to spread communism across the Korean peninsula. The U.S., under the banner of the United Nations, intervened to push back the North Korean forces. What began as a relatively small regional conflict quickly escalated into a brutal, protracted war that ended in a stalemate, with the Korean peninsula divided at the 38th parallel. The war demonstrated the dangerous reality of Cold War confrontations, that the struggle between the U.S. and the Soviet Union could manifest as proxy wars in distant lands, with real and devastating human costs. These challenges, from the Soviet Union's growing power to the domestic fear of communism, to the international conflicts that tested America's commitment to its ideals, proved that America's path to global leadership was not without peril. Yet, despite these obstacles, the United States persevered, adapting its strategies and maintaining its position at the forefront of the Cold War, even as the world around it was changing in unpredictable ways. As the Cold War unfolded, the United States increasingly found itself cast in the role of the world's policeman. With its newfound military and economic power, the U.S. was positioned as the primary defender of democracy, freedom, and capitalism across the globe, especially in the face of Soviet-backed communist expansion. America's interventionist policies, aimed at containing communism and protecting free nations, marked a defining shift in its foreign policy, one that would influence much of the 20th century. The Korean War, which had already tested America's resolve, was a clear example of this emerging role. The United States, under the banner of the United Nations, intervened to prevent the spread of communism into South Korea after the North Korean invasion. This marked the beginning of a long and painful period of military engagements for the U.S. as it sought to assert itself as the global enforcer of democratic values. Although the war ended in a stalemate and Korea remained divided, the U.S. had made it clear that it would take direct action to prevent communist expansion in Asia. In the years that followed, America's interventionist policies continued to take shape, especially in Southeast Asia. The Vietnam War, in many ways, became the most significant and controversial chapter in America's role as the world's enforcer. After the fall of China to communism in 1949 and the growing influence of the Soviet Union, The US began to view the spread of communism in Asia as a domino effect that would eventually threaten other regions. The US commitment to preventing the spread of communism in Vietnam led to a protracted and devastating conflict. Despite immense military and financial resources, the war ended in failure, with Vietnam falling to communism in 1975. The Vietnam War marked a significant moment of introspection for the US, questioning the limits of interventionism and the cost of maintaining global hegemony. Alongside direct military interventions, the US took on the responsibility of providing economic and military aid to its allies worldwide. The American government provided billions of dollars in foreign aid, bolstering the economic recovery of European countries through the Marshall Plan and strengthening non-communist governments through military assistance programs. American military bases were established in key regions, including Europe, Asia, and the Middle East, as a means of projecting power and ensuring the defense of democratic nations. This network of alliances and partnerships, often maintained through aid and military presence, solidified America's role as the de facto guardian of the free world. This interventionist approach positioned the U.S. not only as a military superpower, but also as a global enforcer of democracy, tasked with maintaining order and stability in an increasingly polarized world. America's economic might and military capabilities were linked together in a way that shaped international relations for much of the Cold War. However, this role also came with great challenges, as the U.S. had to balance its commitment to fighting communism with the realities of geopolitical, military, and domestic constraints. As we look back on America's transformation after World War II, it becomes clear that several key factors propelled the nation into its role as the world's leading superpower. First, the sheer economic strength of the U.S., boosted by its unparalleled industrial capacity and financial leadership, laid the foundation for global influence. The Marshall Plan, the GI Bill, and a thriving consumer culture created an economic engine that not only powered America's own prosperity, but also helped stabilize and rebuild the world. America's military dominance, from nuclear weapons to a global network of alliances, ensured that the U.S. would not only defend its own interests but also act as the protector of democracy worldwide. Political leadership, through initiatives like the Truman Doctrine and the creation of NATO, solidified the U.S. as the ideological and moral leader of the free world, while its culture and technological achievements captured the imagination of millions across the globe. Quote, "Powerful ending. From the ashes of global war, America didn't just survive, it built the foundations of the modern world." Call to action. Do you think America's rise after WWII was inevitable, or could history have taken a different path? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.